So far we looked at white's attempt to crush black's defense immediately. And it didn't work. Or it worked only with partial success. But of course, in any position, there are always a number of options, and instead of sacrificing material, one pawn, another pawn, a piece, you can look for some safer continuations. And safe is probably also a relative word, because white already sacrificed material, but they could try to increase their pressure on black's position without burning all the bridges. So in this main line, one of the main lines, that starts with 10 f5, instead of sacrificing the pawn on e5, as we just looked at, and discovered that with very, very precise defense, making number of only moves, probably more only moves that one could dream to make during the entire tournament, black could save the game. But since these moves are made, it's just about your memory, capacity of your memory to keep it in, and so white has to look for some other options. And one of the ideas that was quite popular in 80s is to play simply bishop e2 at move 13. Bishop e7, castle. I save our time by analyzing some sublines. I dropped moves like rook a7 instead of castle, because if such a natural, obvious move as castle short is bad, then probably we have to reassess the entire position. So we should first find out whether castle could hold the position. And again, having in mind number of games, I would use one of the examples. It's my own game, and it's not only because it's a game I played, not only because my opponent was very strong, and not only because I won the game. It was Ivanchuk in Linares 1990. But the game was quite important because more or less it stopped white attempts to find any plus in this line. So rook b3, queen c5, check, bishop e3, queen e5, bishop f4. Now bishop f4. By the way, it's a very good line to make draw, and we know how many sharp lines were turned into the repetitions, and how many games were fixed by just following this sharp line. So after bishop f4, queen c5, check, bishop e3, you can shake your hands with your opponents if you wish. But of course, white didn't play such a sharp line to make a draw. And after queen c5 check, just to mention briefly that taking on e4 doesn't work. Knight takes e4, queen e4, bishop takes d6, and white is pawn down, but because of very passive position of bishop on c8 and also rook on e8 can't come into the action, white is better, as that was proven in a few games played with this line. Queen c5 check, and now king h1. So that was the idea, and now it seems that it's not easy for black to solve the problems, because natural move like e5 is losing immediately. Bishop e3, queen a5, bishop b6, and eventually this queen is lost. But black has a very good sharp continuation, so that's what you have to be prepared, always to look for some tactical resources to support your positional claims. Knight g4. Now after bishop takes g4, e5, it works because rook on f1 is hanging. But instead of taking on g4, white could simply play h3. And then we have a fourth line, e5, knight a4, queen a7, check, king h8, ef4, so h takes g4, e takes f4, knight b6, and that's how Ivanchuk played. There were some games played with rook b8, and black got some problems because white could simply take on f4, and taking on b6 was not possible because then white queen appears on f7 with devastating effect. So you can look at all the lines in the commentaries for the game. But after knight b6, I made a prepared move d5. It opened position in the center, and so position was equal. But Ivanchuk pushed very hard. He wanted to win, and he lost. So that was the end of that line. But again, you could see that even in this quiet continuation, the calm could be always a mirage, because there are so many hidden possibilities for both sides, and black should be extremely cautious, always contemplating opponent's threats and prepared to employ sharp tactics to equalize and to keep afloat. But there were other lines where white wanted to build up its attacking potential before cracking black's defense in the center. And not a surprise that one of the most dangerous attempts came from Riga again. It was Vitolinch and other Latvian players like Edvin Kengis and Zigrid Lanka that worked out the line with bishop e2 instead of f5 on e5. So it makes sense. White just wants to castle and then consider one of the breakthroughs, either f5 or e5 in the center. So in some games, black played very naturally, knight bd7, castle, bishop e7, and now the idea, let's call the Riga idea, worked out beautifully. e5, d5, f5, knight e5, and now bishop takes f6, with the idea that after bishop takes f6, rook takes f6, g takes f6, knight e4, white creates a very powerful attack. So in many Sicilian lines, you shouldn't be very stubborn counting the pieces, because that's what we can do. If we count the pieces, we discover that black has an extra exchange plus 2 pawns. But it's not about just material. It's about the activity of your pieces. It's about the ability of your pieces to play a vital role in the battleground, in the main battleground. So in the section of the board where the game is actually being decided. And now when you look at that, you discover that black rooks on a8 and on h8, they are giving very much contribution to the black's cause. While white knights on e4 and d4, especially this one on e4, are extremely dangerous. And then, for instance, after queen e7 and queen f4, black position is very, very difficult. So another line was to take on f6 with the pawn. That's what black tried when they recognized how dangerous was exchange sacrifice. But again, knight e4, f5, rook b3, and after queen e4, queen c3, and this position proved to be extremely dangerous for black again. Saying the position was dangerous means very little unless you look at the lines, at the commentaries, and just recognize how difficult it is to defend this position when you are facing a very skillful, aggressive, creative player. Oh, by the way, we should mention that the games we are quoting now, the first one was sacrifice on exchange, and the second one, that's we just on the diagram, the player on the white side was Mikhail Tal. Probably it's very natural. He played this Riga variation, and he crushed respectively Lubomir Vtachnik and Shekely in the games played in 1982 and 1983. But then it was discovered that black also could be a little bit more creative, and instead of playing bishop e7, they could play queen c5, and after king h1, bishop e7, so preventing eventually the breakthrough in the center. Here, there was another great Vitolinch idea to attack f5, e5, knight e6. Save your breath, just be quiet, look at the analysis. This line is not winning. It's very dangerous. It requires a very, very precise defensive lines from black, but this line has disappeared. Black now found a number of moves that could, I wouldn't say refute white's attack, but put black out of danger. So the quiet line with bishop a2 knight bd7 didn't work. When I said didn't work, I always mean eventually didn't work, because as we could see, there were a number of scalps taken by white pieces, by white army, in the process of this line being refuted. So it always happens in the sharp Najdorf lines that before the correct moves order is established, there are a number of victims laying behind. Now I would say that we're virtually exhausted Rook b1 line. Again, it's all very relative, saying we're exhausted. I try to show you all the options and just concentrate your attention on the moments of the fight that would be most important for you to learn it. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to learn, it's up to you to analyze, and it's up to you to process these numerous games, these hundreds of games, probably even thousands of games, finding an interesting spot where you can concentrate your attention and put the entire power of your computer or your computers to discover some new ideas. But now, while we're talking about positional lines, we should pay attention to another serious attempt used by many strong players who didn't want to go into these jungles with Rook b1, and they played quietly Knight b3. Also very natural move. The threat is to play a3 and then queen is trapped. Of course, black could play knight c6, and after a3, knight a5, the trap doesn't work. So there is no refutation of knight c6, but it seems to me that white has more options to fight for initiative, and there are more dangers that black is facing, and that's why more players preferred an immediate return of the queen a3. So that would be another key position that we have to look at. And now, although we're still dealing with very sharp lines, with complications, with sacrifices, it's not as